they don't realize how fragile human hearing is. They think it's more reliable. They don't understand. Yeah, I mean, they don't understand the weakness of their own hearing and their susceptibility to bias and to and to well, all the logical flaws. What's the one they when after you buy something and spent too much money on it, you can't admit that you got suckered. I forget there's a logical word for that. Buyer's remorse. I forget what it is, but anyways, but that's really it. And I explained to them. I said, look, the null test proves that these two wires pass audio the same. They can't possibly sound different. Well, you don't know how to measure everything. You know, my ears are better than your measurement. And I say, no, they're not. And I have all kinds of tests.
How are you?
Okay, okay. Here we go. I'm fine. I'm doing great these days. Yeah, really good. Really good. I have, I'm 74 years old. I'm semi-retired, but I'm very active. I sleep until noon most days, and, so this is early in the morning for me. Well, not really, but I have a great life. I love everything I do. I have a new girlfriend who's fantastic, and yeah, things couldn't be better.
Good to hear. So what you say you love what you're doing. What are you doing right now?
Well, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. I still work for Real Traps. I used to own the business with a partner, Doug. We started it in 2002 or 2003. And he wanted to retire. It was about 4.5 years ago. And we were going to just shut the business down. But one of our employees, Sean, said, well, I don't want to lose my job. I'll buy it from you. So we sold him the business basically for the value of the inventory. So now I work for him. And, it's a part-time job. We're small. We're not trying to grow. We stopped advertising 10 years ago. It's all word of mouth. And just, I'm active in Facebook groups and online audio forums and also home theater and hi-fi groups. So, when I help people out, I don't spam them, but I post links to articles and offer useful advice. So that's pretty much how we keep going. I don't want to, we're as busy as we want to be, don't want to grow. So that's a part of what I do. I'm also doing a lot of electronic work, circuit design and stuff. Most of that stuff gets published in a magazine called Audio Express. It's a print magazine or a real magazine. But my arrangement with them is all of my articles end up on on their website, 2 months after the print version comes out. Which works for both of us, because then I can post on my Facebook page, here's a new article about printed circuit board design, or I did a 5-part series on how to design a guitar synthesizer, where you could use any guitar, not needing special pickups and stuff. And that was, I showed how to make LFOs and oscillators and filters. So actually, I used the mini Moog filter and showed how to, have that schematic and talked about how it works. So that's another part of what I'm doing. I actually got a patent recently on a unique device that I can't really talk about too much. I'm still trying to market it. But it's a microphone that has a synthesizer in it. So it creates sounds triggered by drums.
A microphone that has a synthesizer in it that creates sounds triggered by drums. Maybe you could. I don't want to get too into it. You're going to talk about it, but
no. I'm protected by the patent, so it doesn't really matter too much. It's basically it's a kick drum synthesizer built into a mic. It's really hard. Getting a good kick drum sound is kind of like the holy grail for recording it. It sounds floppy, or there's always problems. It's really hard to EQ and make it meaty and punchy, but without being flabby and too boomy or boxy sounding, or breaking up on small speakers. So this is it synthesizes an idealized kick drum that's broadband. So it's not tuned. You tune it yourself with an EQ. So if you know how to work a parametric EQ, you can get just about any kick drum sound out of it. And I have a bunch of templates showing how to get, all different kinds of sounds. So, but I'm trying to market it. To go into the microphone business, you got to make 5,000, 20,000 of them. You got to go to China. You have to make arrangements, or not China, somewhere in Asia. make arrangement. You know, I'm too old for that. I'm not going to start another company. So I want to license it to somebody who's already in that business and just do royalties. So so I have a friend who's in the business who's trying to hook me up with the right company.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I think that with your reputation and having written the book that you've written that is so popular and taught all over the world, that you would have no problem, launching something like that.
Yeah, I would have thought too. When this fellow's talked to a bunch of companies and he says, "Well, so far I haven't found anybody, and for various reasons." So maybe they don't understand how it works. I made a very compelling 10-minute demo, which isn't public. It's on my own website, kind of hidden, but for potential investors, if you'll call it, to see. So, but I'm still working on it, and I have another friend who's going to help, and I can make some phone calls myself.
Okay.
So
Well, I
anyways,
think
that's another
that's
project.
yeah, just wishing you all the best with that. I think what's most interesting to me is to kind of catch up where we left off in the last interview and just kind of like see where is your thinking at? Like, have you changed your opinion on anything since we last spoke, which was a few years ago now? Um, and yeah, I just suppose, like, how do you feel about the way that things are going in the world, in audio, in the music industry, AI, et cetera, et cetera? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. And are you still experiencing the same BS, getting kicked out of forums, et cetera, for your opinions? Like, what's been happening?
Right. Well, the last group I got kicked out of was a Facebook home theater group because they objected to my saying pretty much every room needs bass traps. I mean, if you want accurate bass and full, clear, and not have some notes drop out or be too boomy, you need bass traps. I mean, this is just a given. And they got mad. But that was a couple of years ago. I haven't really had any friction in the groups that I'm currently doing. It was probably about 4 or 5 home theater type, home recording type groups I'm in, and a couple of home theater and audiophile groups. So I haven't had a problem with that. But yeah, the bullshit is still the same. It's still, people think that wires make a difference, and even power wires, and or that you have to spend $10,000 on monoblock power amplifiers to get good, clear sound. So I'm still fighting the good fight, explaining what really the issue is, how is fidelity defined? You don't want color. You don't want a colored sound. Color is fine during the production process. That's what the recording and mixing engineers do. Is they'll add distortion on purpose with transformers or or plugins or however you do it. Little bits to add a little grit or glue or whatever. But once the artist and the producer and the mixing engineer have signed off on a project, from there on it should be, you want accuracy, and you can get, you don't spend a lot of money for accurate equipment. So yeah, and there's an article on my site that explains all of this in great detail. It was actually published, I don't know, 10 years ago in Skeptic magazine, a very big magazine here in the States. It's not a hi-fi magazine, but they were interested in that topic. So yeah, AI is, I find, very interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but I've seen some of what it can do, and it's pretty impressive. I I asked ChatGPT to write a love poem to my new girlfriend, and it was pretty impressive, and she was impressed too. She's actually smart. She's much younger than me, so she's really savvy with all the tech, much more savvy than me. I'm kind of an expert with all of my old geezer friends when they have computer problems or problems with their, recording software or whatever. They come to me, and I go to Kim. when I have problems. She's shown me so many things that you can do on Google and YouTube. I had no idea, features that I just had no idea were there. So that's pretty funny.
That's too entertaining. Did you tell her that ChatGPT wrote the poem?
I'm sorry, that got cut out.
Did you tell her that ChatGPT wrote the poem?
Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, all right.
And just while we have something you'll have to edit, am I dropping out? I should probably close Firefox so it doesn't keep pinging the internet. I meant to do that, but I got so distracted. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're still on.
I think I'm going to close WhatsApp as well. I just put my phone on airplane, so it shouldn't actually engage anymore. it's very frustrating when, like, you know, you put system sounds on mute and then you still get a WhatsApp notification with sound. It's like, nice, you know what I mean?
Oh, because it's their own sound. Yeah,
So
yeah,
irritating, honestly.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have all my system sounds turned off. You got the volume cranked up to hear something in a mix,
Hmm.
and
So,
all of a sudden,
so why is it that people think that they can argue with your opinion or that you're incorrect? Like, what is it in them? Like why are they convinced, for example, that a cable does make a difference to the sound when, like, I mean, you can literally say to them, this is the math. I've done a, you know, zero null test, whatever it is called. I can't
right?
remember.
The null test, yes.
The null test. So what is it in their minds that, like, that they can have the audacity to argue with you?
Right. I can tell you, and I try to avoid what they call logically arguing from authority.
Mhm.
But sometimes I have to say, look, let me know when you have a book that's used by Tufts University and Notre Dame University and major recording schools. Let me know when you've recorded and written compositions for full orchestra that have been performed. Let me know, and a whole list of things that I've done. Uh, but I try to avoid that. That's kind of like the last step. But I can tell you exactly the answer to your question. They don't realize how fragile human hearing is. They think it's more reliable. They don't understand. Yeah, I mean, they don't understand the weakness of their own hearing and their susceptibility to bias and to and to all the logical flaws. What's the one when after you buy something and spent too much money on it, you can't admit that you got suckered. I
Mhm.
forget. There's a logical word for that. Buyer's remorse. I forget what it is, but anyways, but that's really it. And I explained to them. I said, look, the null test proves that these two wires pass audio the same. They can't possibly sound different. Well, you don't know how to measure everything. My ears are better than your measurement. And I say, no, they're not. And I have all kinds of tests on my website, plus the two videos I made from my AES Audio Engineering Society workshops. And I made videos where that have the same tests or files you can download from my website that let you hear music with a static noise, like a nasty noise mixed in at -40, then mixed in at -50, -60. Once it gets below -40, 50, 60, depending on the music, of course, and how loud the music is, you just can't hear it. And these people, the null test proves that these things are down to below the noise floor of a CD, minus 110 dB. These wires are identical, and they just they don't understand that. They think they can hear things. And I said, well, look, we can measure distortion of 0.0001%. You can't hear 0.1%. I mean, you can't tell that. Maybe in very special situations you could tell. You certainly can't tell 0.01. So we can measure much, much more accurately than anything you could possibly hear. But they're arrogant. I mean, they're arrogant, and the Dunning-Kruger effect, where when you first learn something or get interested in a hobby, you realize, oh, I don't know much. Then you'll learn a little bit, and now all of a sudden you think you're a friggin' expert. And that's where they are on this on the Dunning-Kruger scale, is they think they are an expert. So they argue, and sometimes I win them over, but not usually. Maybe one time out of 10, somebody will end up saying, "Oh, you know what? I see," but most of the time they just go off in a huff.
Yeah.
and,
And
and,
then you're
and
off
then
the
they
audio forums.
and then they of course resort to name calling.
Mm.
It's, well, you're an idiot, and you're just trying to sell stuff, or you're just whatever. So what can you do? At that point.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're intelligent enough to create something like ChatGPT, but we just can't even admit when we're wrong, or enough to, it's
Right.
quite unreal. Anyways, so that's interesting. So when would you say, now this is an interesting one for me, so something I've delved a little into recently is kind of mixing bands down live. It's something that I do if we have a gig at the DJ company and, like, we've sent a band or a couple of musicians out with the DJ. I just happen to be there and I'll mix them down. And, I find that in that instance, depending on the space, etc., you kind of have to combine your mathematical understanding and your understanding of audio with your hearing. So would you say that in that kind of instance, like if you're doing live mixing, that's when your ears kind of come in? Like, where do you use your ears in your opinion versus where do you use the math in combination?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, I don't consider myself a great mixing engineer. I think I'm okay, and I've gotten better actually, even though I'm really old. The last 10, 15 years, I think I'm better than I ever was at getting, a good balanced mix that sounds good, not now, but also sounds good tomorrow. That's a classic problem. It sounds good, and you keep making it louder and louder, and then tomorrow you realize what a mess it is. But the hard part of mixing is knowing what sounds good, and it's very deceiving. It's very hard to nail it down, and or even more to the point, knowing what to change when you hear something that's boxy sounding. And I don't think it's necessarily learning frequencies, like they have these train your ear courses for $80, and they teach you what different third octave or octave band pink noise sounds like. I don't think it's that as much as maybe even an innate talent. I have a friend, Peter Hodgson, who we've been friends going back to the 1970s. And he's always been better than me. I mean, he's always been a better mixing engineer because he just knows how to make things sound better. He can hear something and say, "Oh, this needs, this has too much around 800." And of course, you can sweep those frequencies. If something sounds not good, a lot of times it's better to cut out what sounds bad rather than just boost, the bass and the treble with Smiley curve. So you can boost, set a big boost and then sweep it around until you, oh, that's what sounds really icky. Then you put it back to normal, wait 10 seconds to your ears to get used to it again, and then you can cut it out. And all of a sudden, oh, that's much clearer. And, when you were talking about AI, there are frequency bands that are kind of muddy sounding, like around 300 hertz. That's good for a viola. Though that's a good frequency to boost if the viola is thin. But generally in a mix, with drums and full pop mix. So I think AI, and so they have these things like Harbal, automated program that kind of figures out what's wrong with your mix. But that's of course working as a mastering program, or AI would work on a final mix, where you really have to do that, I think, on an individual level. The tom has this ringing thing that you need to get rid of. Well, you don't want to get rid of that on the entire mix. You're going to kill the lead guitar or whatever.
So in that case, look, something that I find quite useful is, let's say that we're doing microphone only, and this is the thought, I'm by no means always calculating particularly, but let's say we're doing microphone only and it's something like a public address. Or let's say it's a public address and then I'm going to play some music as well. In order to highlight, like, the frequencies in the room that are a problem, I'll just kind of like put the microphone almost directly in front of a speaker, but at a volume that it doesn't feed back. But then I will increase the graphic EQ on each band until feedback happens, to kind of like indicate to me, okay, this band is a problem in the room, right? Is that a logical way to kind of deal with the room? And then would you want to leave it there so that the rest of what you play sounds good, or would you want to turn that graphic off when you're playing other things, like you just said?
Right. Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's a good method, because you said you put the mic near the speaker, so you're kind of short-circuiting the room. That could then help compensate for peaks and nulls or problems in the speaker or microphone, if this is the typical vocal mic or whatever mic you're using. But I would think you would have to do that with a microphone out in the room. So I'm not sure. And of course, there's devices that will do that stuff automatically. The feedback destroyer kind of devices. I'm not sure. I think that adjusting tonal balance really does need to be done by ear. But when you were originally saying, what do you do by ear, what do you do by science, I think setting up the microphones initially when you're recording or for a live sound, that's kind of science-based, because you have cardioids, you have figure eights, and if you got a singing guitar player, you can angle the figure eight to get the guitar and the voice and get rid of the stuff from the sides. So I think there's maybe more science there. There's also science when I do a mix. A lot of times I'll solo each track and just see if there's any rumbling stuff going on, low frequencies that aren't needed. And that's a common technique, of course, to high pass or low cut, tracks that don't need it. And the whole thing can just end up being a little tighter and clearer if you have a lot of tracks that are adding. So that, I guess that's science based, because you're not really doing it by, well, you're doing it by ear to listen, or you can just do it routinely. I have a mandolin. I might as well just cut everything below 200 hertz, because there's nothing that low on a mandolin. Don't even have to listen, and you can do that kind of stuff on cymbals, maybe also a hi-hat mic.
Yeah, you touched on something just now that interests me a lot. Something I do with my students is that I make it mandatory, especially in the beginning, whether it's electronic or classical. Like, we listen with scores if it's classical, or we listen with our eyes closed if it's electronic, which is something that Stockhausen interestingly used to do with his live performances of his electronic works. He would actually turn all the lights off and people would listen with their eyes closed. And I think there's huge value in that for actually like determining what sounds good. But at the end of the day, who is to say what actually sounds good? Like, how would you define a good sound, and how can one actually gain that like structured opinion of what is good versus bad? How do you gain discernment there, and how do we know what is the measurement protocol there?
Right. Well, and that's a good question. I think there are universal things where a mix that's like obviously distorted or obviously really boomy sounding, everybody will say that doesn't sound right. Even if they're just not recording people or audio people, just your mother, your cousin, whatever, can tell a bad mix if it's really bad. But people do have preferences. Some people like the super low sub bass stuff. I like that. As long as it's not too much or too distorted. So, but yeah, that is there is no real answer, but really good mixes sound really good. But it was interesting what you were saying about turning the lights off. I've had a theory, and I don't really have any proof for it, but it sure seems like it's true, that music sounds better when it's accompanied by a visual. And I think that the idea is that the visual distracts a little bit from the critical part of the audio. If the audio isn't great, but you're looking at an interesting cartoon or some whatever, there's all kinds of videos that they do for all kinds of music, that it takes away some of the negative part from the audio. So I could see how the opposite, what you were saying, shutting off the lights, takes away those distractions, and then you can hear more clearly. And, I'll just say one other thing, and I know you're about to say something. I also think that I haven't smoked pot in like a bunch of years, but I used to smoke every day, for decades. And I always found that I could hear details much better when I was high. I mean, you hear things that you just didn't hear otherwise. And of course, listening to the same music over and over and over, you'll hear details you didn't hear before. But I found I could really hear into the music, if I had smoked pot.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I cannot advocate for or not for something like smoking marijuana, although I have done it here and there. It's something that I don't do anymore. But the most incredible experience I've had in my entire life was listening to an album called Dream Recall by Frequent, which is actually on my YouTube. I really encourage you to go listen to it. When it came out, it was probably the most interesting album of electronic dance music. It was really intellectual dance music, IDM, that was really listenable, but that contained almost no repetition. And it's very complex in its level of detail. And Frequent, the artist, actually took 2 years to write this album. Each track is a collaboration with a different artist. And I just so happened to smoke a joint before listening to it one evening. Now, I have synesthesia, which I think I told you before. So I already see like indescribable shapes and colors when I listen to music. That is just like a given. I cannot even begin to appreciate what musical sound might be without some kind of accompanying visual elements. So perhaps, that also, it might distract me from the critical aspects. But I did find that when I smoked marijuana and listened to that album, Dream Recall, I quite literally saw like 3-dimensional objects in a just blank black nothingness. But the sound quite literally came to life in ways that I couldn't even begin to describe to you. It was almost like I was listening by the nanosecond, that like each nanosecond of information, almost each vibration of the wave became an individual cluster of shapes, surrounding the kind of overall like frontline image. So it was quite incredible. So I think there's definitely something to that. I don't know if there are any studies that have been done, but I'm sure that people would probably enjoy listening to. I know that people tend to listen to music when I think that they've, smoked or done something. So that's definitely in line with my experience. But it's interesting what you say about hiding the bad details. Like how good does a mix have to be before we can listen to it with our eyes closed and really appreciate it? I suppose the reason that I would do it is for that critical listening aspect. Is it true, would you say, that we can only hear like two elements at a time, like on the general? And where does that kind of start or end? Is it possible to train outside of that, in your opinion? Like, can we hear three elements, four elements at the same time? Or are we always going to be bound to two elements? And then furthermore, I listened to one of your audio myth busting conferences, and one of your colleagues spoke about even hearing different bands in the same sound on different occasions. When you can listen to the identical sound, but if you're listening for the high end and then you're listening for the low end, you'll have different experiences. So like, how does that come to play?
Right. Well, yeah, that was James Johnston, JJ, and he's a very well known high up guy in the audio world, and so he can tell you better than I can the answer to that question. But I absolutely believe him. I don't know if it's two things you can hear or three things you can hear at once, but you certainly can't hear everything at once in a mix. And I also want to make it clear that you should not ever consider a mix finished if you're stoned. Yeah. And it's the same problem with headphones. You can hear things very clearly, and the problem is you'll tend to make the lead vocal too soft, or other important things too soft, because you can hear them so clearly in your ears with earphones, or if you're focusing on it and you're stoned or whatever. And that's part of my problem. That's why I don't think I'm as good a mix engineer. I know I'm not as good as like the really good ones, because they can just tell by listening it's too loud, it's not too loud. Related to mix engineers, and this is not really audio, but it's very much related. There's when you watch a movie or a TV show, there's a recording engineer called the re-recording engineer. And that's actually the person that makes the final mix of the dialogue and the music and any sound effects, Foley that's added. That's the key person. And even my friend Peter Hodgson, who's better than me, he's in awe of these. He says, "Oh man, those guys are really good. I'm okay, but those guys are great." And I've been watching old episodes on Hulu of a TV show, a cop show called NYPD Blue. And I've been watching, look at the credits, and they have two re-recording engineers. Every time I've been watching season after season, and they have two of them. And obviously one is a backup to get a second opinion, because it's so difficult. I mean, it really is hard it's really hard. Yeah, it's really difficult to tell when something is just exactly the right volume, the right tonality. It's tough.
Yeah, that thing that you said about the vocals is interesting to me. When I was writing Gravity with Chaz Sparks, for example, like I sent them what I thought was the final mix, and they were like, "You need to make the vocal like 6 decibels louder than it is. You can't hear the vocal." And like that stuck with me, and I thought to myself, what do you mean you can't hear the vocal? Like, I can hear it so well, but ultimately, like, I know the lyrics. I know that vocal. I've sung it many a time. And I think that's something that producers kind of like, take a bit for granted. It's like, well, your average person doesn't know the lyrics before they've heard the song. So they can't identify those. They can't. And there's nothing more frustrating to me, like even in something like Massive Attack, Heligoland, which like is such a disappointment for me, like personally, after something like Mezzanine, in one of the tracks, I think it's track 3, Split the Atom. Like, I think it's Split the Atom. I can't even hear the lyrics sometimes. The vocals so soft. I'm thinking, wow, Massive Attack. Like, how could you botch this like this? Don't you have like the best engineers in the world? Like, how can you make a mistake like that? So it is. I can really resonate with what you just said.
There's I listen to Get News mostly on AM radio, which is a little muffled compared to FM or streaming. And there's an ad I keep hearing on the local CBS, major news station. It's an ad for some kids program called ABC Mouse, ABC Mouth, ABC. I have no idea what they're saying. It could be like several other words that it sounds like, and they say it fast and they don't say it clearly. And probably the recording engineer and the producer, the people from the company who approved it, they all know what the word is. ABC Mouse, ABC Mouth, ABC Mouth. And that's why I hear it's ABC Mouth. and I have no idea what the website is. They add a .com on the end. I have no idea. That ad cannot be effective for them because if I can, if my hearing's very good for my age,
Hmm.
so I don't know, but it's the same thing with vocals. If you know the words, you can understand them at a much lower volume.
Right, so we can say that then one of the components for like the perfect mix or what sounds or constitutes something good, if I had to define it, then would you say that it would be like a clear balance between all of the individual components of the mix and clarity there? And like are we aiming for clarity? What are we actually aiming for in something that sounds good? Like we want each individual sound to have a good like band structure, and then we want every sound in interaction with one another to have clarity in its own place in the mix. Like would you say that something that achieves that and that also achieves like an audible enough loudness, would that be something good if it's musically good as well? Before we even get into it.
Yeah, well, I think everything should be clear and easy to hear. I have seen interviews with well-known mix engineers who know what they're talking about, saying everything doesn't have to be clear. Like things like rhythm guitar has to be loud enough to establish the chord, so it's a major or minor chord or whatever chord it is, along with whatever the bass note is at that time. But for me, I like everything to be able to be heard clearly and be able to to pick everything out. That's especially true, I think, with classical music, where there's lots of, melodies weave back and forth. The oboe plays a melody, and then the violins take it, and then the clarinet, and of course, a good conductor. The conductor is the mix engineer. It's up to him during rehearsal to make sure everybody's playing at the right level.
Mm.
So things can be heard. So that's my preference. I can't say that's true. I'm getting a thing on
A
my eye.
friend and colleague of mine, Alan Chen, thinks that like the convention of not altering a recording of classical music is essentially outdated and frankly ridiculous. Do you agree? Do you think that we should actually remix a classical recording after it's been recorded, even if those weren't the actual levels that were played by an orchestra? Like, do you think that there should actually just be a mixing standard that brings things out further rather than
I, I,
being,
Yeah,
yeah?
absolutely. I do agree with that. And most classical recordings, the big budget stuff, they not only have a decatry, or they'll have a space pair, or they'll have whatever main stereo microphone setup, but they'll also have spot mics in front of each section, just so they can mix it. And if you record it to 24 tracks or 16 or however many mics you have, I think that should be adjusted later. Well, I mean, obviously they do that. That's why they have a mic on the harp. The harp is soft, so whether it's done live at the recording to live to 2-track, or if they do record multi-track, somebody should make that decision. There's a fantastic video. It's about an hour long that was sponsored by Waves, and it's on YouTube, featuring a mix engineer, Alan Meyerson, and he mixed the original Wonder Woman movie. And it's really good. I see, there's millions of movies out there, and I can't watch every movie, especially when they're that long. I was just glued to this. I watched the whole thing all the way through and learned so much. And he talks about exactly what you're asking, as how to enhance it to make it sound better. And a good recording should sound better than sitting even in the best seat in the house in a really good auditorium. You can always bring out a little more low end on the basses and a little more clarity here, a little more, whatever. And he shows how he does it and how he did it for that movie. And if anybody that's watching us, you and me now, who hasn't seen this movie, look for Alan Meyerson, sponsored by Waves, Wonder Woman. Those would be the keywords to look for.
Cool. I think that anyone would have heard what you just said. I'm so pleased to tell you because you're actually using a decent microphone. But it's interesting to hear that. Would you say then that like the ultimate mix down would essentially make it sound like you are sitting next to every single instrument at the same time? Like your ear is right next to like the resonating chamber. Is that ultimately the best mix possible then, in your opinion?
Well, a classical recording, of course, should have distance and reverb to it, and depth. And the French horns are in the back row with the trombones, and the violins and cellos are up front. The string basses are halfway back on the right side. The violas are also partway back, behind the first and second violins. Well, it depends. I mean, there are different standards. So there should be some depth too. So I don't know if it should sound like you're right next to everybody. Yeah, things should be panned out left, right, and with time-based effects like reverb to give some depth. Uh, so so I think there should be some of that, but again, my preference is for absolute clarity, where you can hear everything, and everything sounds good. Nothing is tinny, nothing is boomy, nothing is harsh sounding, and you should be able to turn it up really loud, without the bottom farting out or the highs getting really strident. That's a good test. I don't think you should necessarily mix at a 95 dB SPL, but it's always good to try it to make sure your mix isn't going to fall apart and bomb out the speakers at really high level.
Well, that obviously requires you to have speakers that are high fidelity, firstly. But secondly,
Well, of course.
yeah, right. And you spoke about the placement of the instruments being like maintained. Like, I suppose that's part of the argument. Like, should that even be maintained? Like, why is it important how the instrumentalists sat relative to one another in that? Is that because that affected the actual balance that the conductor chose in that case? Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but it wouldn't be stereo if everything was centered right in the middle and you were right in
Right.
front of everything. Then it wouldn't be stereo either. So, and if you have the first violins and the cellos playing the same thing an octave apart, you want that stereo effect.
Speaking of stereo, so what is, in your opinion, a true stereo? I always used to say to my students, like, ultimately, like, mono is the sound hits your ears at the same time. Stereo is it hits your ears at a different time. So the best way that you can make a stereo image of a sound is literally to duplicate it and create like a 10 millisecond delay between each side and pan one hard left and pan one hard right. I mean, is that a real stereo image? Obviously, when the image combines, you might lose something. But I mean, that to me is what true stereo is. What is it in your opinion?
Well, if you have a mono mix and you put that all the way on the left, and then 10 milliseconds later on the right, it's still you still don't get the separation. You'll still have what's called the masking effect, where two different things like a cello and a trombone often doubled in classical arranging. They'll play the same thing, and it'll kind of fuse. You won't hear that. You won't hear as distinctly, oh, that's a cello and a trombone. You'll hear a cello bone instrument playing. A bigger problem, of course, is if you mix it to mono, which absolutely happens on AM radio, music on hold, you'll get a horrible comb filtering effect, horrible flange. It'll be like a flange going through a flanger. So you don't want that either. But yeah, you want to spread things out left and right to avoid masking, and that's a nice advantage to mixing in surround 5.1 surround, and now they're using Atmos with 12 speakers or whatever. But I've done some surround mixes and found that it's nice to have things panned not only left and right to get separation to hear them clearly, but having things on the sides and behind you. I think that helps, but everybody doesn't have a system capable of that. Almost nobody does. I know they're working on getting headphones to do that, and I've heard one old one, this was years ago, that was pretty impressive. So not along with AI, I guess they're making these things better.
Yeah, you just reminded me of that paragraph in your book talking about how when you like put a phaser on something, you're actually hearing a reduction in sound rather than the addition of the sound. I just remembered that now as you were talking about that. Would the perfect stereo then in that case, technically, let's say you were able to have like interlocking comb frequencies that you then panned left and right. So like 50% of all the frequencies went left and then an interlocking comb went right, that if they were combined, they would just create the full image. Would that be the best image then?
That wouldn't be the best, but that is one way that stereo synthesizers work. And there's actually a device that I built in the 1970s and wrote an article that's on my website, ethanweiner.com, on my articles page called, Build a Stereo Synthesizer. And it actually shows exactly what you're talking about. The peak and null frequencies on one side are exactly opposite from what's on the other side. So you get a very strong stereo effect. But it's a little artificial sounding. It's not do it that way. Again, I wouldn't start with a mono mix and spread it through this, but this is a nice way to, you can, if you sweep the frequencies around, it's a Leslie speaker effect. Or you can, it's like a phaser effect if you're sweeping it, but it's a stereo phaser. So that's a really cool thing on an electric piano or, or a rhythm guitar or something. A slowly strummed rhythm guitar would be, could be a useful effect. But for stereo, and again, I'm more the science guy than the than the subjective stuff. I mean, again, I think I mix okay. I mean, I've been doing this for 55 years, something like that. So, but yeah, I think normal stereo is pretty darn good. I've heard recordings from I have a CD from late 50s or early 60s stereo of popular orchestra music. Bert Kaempfert, whose big hit was called African Beat. This was back in the late 50s, early 60s. And it's a really nice CD. It's, it sounds really good. But even better than that are the, modern movie soundtracks are really good. I mean, you can, any of the, well, I haven't seen every movie, but any of the movies I have, the ones I like, whether they're animated or romance, or comedies, when they have orchestra music, it sounds really good. It sounds better than most orchestra recordings because of things like Alan Meyerson shows techniques he does to clarify.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm talking about like when I say stereo, I just mean even if you're just working on an individual sound, more than like the stereo mix itself. I'm not
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not implying that you would take the entire piece and just
Gotcha.
I'm talking about like an individual sound, and there's more that I want to say on that as well. So I don't know what would be like. You said like true stereo or the best stereo or real stereo. What is that to you?
Well, right, and that's why I said electric piano or slow strum rhythm guitar is a good candidate for that kind of stereo synthesizer, because those are inherently mono instruments. A grand piano can be mic'd in stereo with distant mics, and you can, or you could have one close and one far, or you could have four mics. You could have two room mics and two close mics right above the hammers, and you can mix them in some blend and get a nice stereo effect. In pop music, I don't think you want the piano to take up the entire width. Usually it'll be, some, section like that. But yeah, with inherently mono instruments like electric guitar or electric piano, then that's absolutely valid, certainly, to create stereo out of that. And it makes it sound more interesting. It sounds bigger. It sounds, more depth, even though depth to me is front to back, more breadth, more width. So that's a good thing.
Why is it that we can't replicate like perfectly a three-dimensional sound? For example, like I know that you get like virtual barbershop and that kind of thing. What is that doing? Why can a microphone not replicate my ears? In other words, why can't the microphone actually create that distance just right off the bat? I'm talking front and back, etc.
Well, it sort of does. I mean, if you have an acoustic guitar as a simple source that's not too big like a piano, and the farther back you get, you can hear that it sounds more distant because you're getting more room sound. You're getting more reflections. If you're right in front of the guitar, it's pretty clear, and as you get farther back. But your ears, you have two ears, and you can hear things coming from behind you. You can tell it's behind you. A microphone can't do that. It's even a stereo pair. You would need speakers behind you. That's another advantage of surround sound, is you can more easily emulate, reality and being in an audience where there's people clapping and they're behind you, which is, you can't really get out of a stereo pair, no matter where you put the microphones, just because the microphones. And I don't know if that's really the best answer. Somebody like, James Johnson, I mentioned before, would probably have a better answer than what I just gave.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because what you're essentially saying is it can't sound like it's behind you because ultimately the speakers are in front of you. So, what I'm saying is surely because like what's really happening is wherever the sound is, like the reason that you hear it coming from a certain direction, as far as I understand it, is because of the shape of your ears and how the sound is reflecting off your ears. So ultimately, if you were able to like trick your ears with the frequency response of the speakers in front of you, I suppose that's what virtual barbershop does, or, these 3D mixes, but you have to have headphones on in that case. I guess the problem is when the speakers are in front of you. That's why they say put headphones on, right?
Right, exactly, and that's why I was saying I've heard some of these headphone simulations. I heard an early one, and it was pretty impressive. They even had it hooked up with an LED or a laser or something, where as you turned your head, it knew where the front of the room was. So as you turned your head, it followed it. I think it was called Smith or something. This was like 10 or more years ago. But I know I see, I can't keep up with everything that comes out. I mean, every month in every magazine, there's 20 new products. I don't have a chance to hear them or try them necessarily. And I don't really care, but I read about them. And I'm interested in the technology and what's coming. Uh, so but yeah, you would need to do that with earphones and in various phase shifts to skew things. It's not just the frequency response, but also the arrival times, the phase. Uh,
Okay, all right. So I have two questions for you. One, I don't want to forget. So, maybe let's come back to that. And that is like you obviously have a passion for, as you would say, kind of like taking things apart and putting them back together and like exploring the structure of things, what makes them work. So I really want to, I want to hear from you. Where did that come from? So that's my first question. And the second one is like on the opposite end of the spectrum, like when it comes to just when we're talking about stereo music, I'm not talking 5.1, 7.1, etc., surround, how much further can tech get us where that is concerned? And like in other words, surely no synthesizer, whether it's like a 96 kilohertz synthesizer or like 192 kilohertz, whatever it is, surely we cannot actually just like draw anything more out of what is capable for these ears. In other words, it doesn't matter how much faster our new computers are or synthesizers are. Ultimately, our ears can only hear at a certain rate. Surely we've exhausted the capabilities of stereo. And furthermore, in that sense, surely like there's no difference between what a computer can do and what a Moog can do, for argument's sake. Surely I can do anything with a computer that any hardware can do.
oh yeah, oh absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like it's an age-old argument. Oh, well, I want to use hardware because it has a warmer sound or all this sensational talk. Surely you can do anything with a computer, and it doesn't matter how many more frequency bands we add on top of what we can hear. It'll probably only hurt rather than add to what we've already achieved, right? Like where stereo is concerned, surely like it's the end, and all we can do is just use our ears better to determine like what works and what doesn't work in terms of synthesis, etc., and track arrangement and production.
Right. Well, audio electronics have been perfect for at least 20 years, and there's been stuff going back 40 years that was what's called audibly transparent. Distortion is low enough that you can't hear it. The frequency response is flat enough that you can't tell that it's like 0.1 dB down at 22 kilohertz, and the noise is too soft to hear even when you stop the music. So I mean, they've had really high quality stuff. The last frontier is loudspeakers mostly. Just because of the physics problems with a directivity. No loudspeaker is good off axis. As soon as you move, a little bit to the side, you get a different frequency response. And, and they make it better and better and better, but I think that's pretty much maxed out at this point. And microphones, but microphones are pretty good these days. They don't have that kind of problem. What I call tiny diaphragm. There's a large diaphragm like 1 inch, and the small diaphragm are more like half an inch. But the tiny ones, off like the Earthworks and DPA microphones that are used for measuring rooms often, and also for cymbals and stuff. Those are really, really good. So, but they still have problems off, with sounds from behind. They're still a little muffled compared to coming right in the front, but those are pretty good. So speakers is really the last thing. But yeah, the electronics are fine. There's no benefit to having frequency response past what people can hear, and nobody can hear past 21, 22 kilohertz, not even teenagers. So CD quality, 16-bit, 44 is all you need for distribution. People argue, excuse me, that you need more than that for recording. And I would agree with that. If I was recording a classical orchestra, or even a live pop band, if I was doing it in stereo, a live concert, 24 bits is good because you can leave 15 dB headroom, because they're always going to be louder than when you ask them to play as loud as it'll be. They're at rehearsal. I've done that with orchestras, set up microphones, say, all right, play the loudest part of the thing you're doing. And it's always 5 dB louder at the concert. So 24 bits would help. Then again, you can record at minus 15 with 16 bits and not have a problem. That was a real eye opener for me when I used to record and play in local symphony and would record some of the concerts. Even though they had quiet air conditioning, I mean, you didn't hear the air handlers. When everything stopped, the VU meter was bouncing around minus 65, minus 70, I think at the lowest. So there was another 25 dB, of noise floor potential from the medium. So I could have just recorded at minus 15, and then the stuff would have been bouncing around minus 90, 85, and I still was above the noise floor of 16 bits.
So could you explain that? Could you explain what is, just for like the people listening, what's the bit depth versus the sample rate? Like, what is it? What is 16 bits versus 24, and what's 24 bits, 16 bits versus like 44.1 kilohertz?
Well, the number of bits is the noise floor. If you play an analog tape, there's always a hiss that you can hear when the music stops, but the tape is still playing. Even if it's a blank tape that's never been recorded on, there's still some hiss noise. It's about minus 70 dB down, minus 60, depending on various factors. And cassette tapes, some people still have cassettes, I guess. Maybe the youngsters these days have never seen them, but those are worse because it's like 1/8-inch tape with 4 tracks on it, and so the signal noise was about 50 dB below the music. You can really hear that when the music stops, but the tape is still going at the end of a song. So that's what the number of bits is. It's just it's the hiss, the inevitable hiss sound is how far down is that. And once in CDs or 16 bits, the noise is 96 decibels below the maximum level you can put in there before you get distortion. That's a very big range. Now, our hearing can hear a little more than that, but it's really painful at the top, and you have to be in a really quiet room to hear below about 25 or 30 dB SPL, sound pressure, absolute sound levels. You have to be in a really quiet place. But the sample rate, so was the bit depth. The sample rate is how fast these little snapshots are taking, how often. And 44.1 kilohertz takes one snapshot of the audio coming out of the microphone for every 44,000 times per second.
I totally get that. So with the bit depth, are you saying that the bit depth affects how far below the recorded signal or the output signal the tape kind of noise floor is? And what is that noise floor? Why is it there? Is it always there? Like, no matter what you do, what causes that noise floor?
Noise is everywhere, and even in it's just in the air. It's due to random. Excuse me. Noise is due to random molecular motion, and one of the simplest components. I don't know if I can pull one up here. No, so I have a box full of resistors and switches and stuff. One of the simplest components is a resistor. It's a passive component. It's like a piece of pencil lead with wires stuck on each end. And even that has noise. It's called Johnson noise, after the guy who discovered or identified it, and realized that it's due to random molecular motion. So it's always there. With tape, you have a magnetized, well, it's plastic with iron stuff on there, and even though you haven't magnetized it with audio, there's still some magnetism. All these little tiny dots, it's called slurry. It's a paste that has tiny pieces of iron, suspended, and it's just each one is, one's magnetized this way, one's that way, a tiny bit just from existence. So that's what.
Okay.
And yeah.
So why would it make a difference then if I chose to set the settings on my program to 16 bits or 32 or whatever multiple of 16? Why does it make a difference what I set on the computer if it actually has to do with like the circuitry of the computer? How can I avoid that noise floor more by changing a setting in something like Cubase in that case? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you can't, because that's not where the noise comes from. The noise comes from the microphone. It comes from the room. Just, if you have an air conditioner or just forced air, even if you don't really notice it, it's still there, and it comes from the preamp circuits, because they amplify. A microphone puts out a very small signal, and again, there's noise even in a microphone. If you put a microphone and you wrapped it in a pillow and put it inside a box and put that in a really quiet room, there's still some noise coming out of there. It's really, really small. It'd be the same noise as from a resistor, or just a piece of just a piece of pencil lead.
Okay, so I take the same track that, let's say I've made a purely electronic, nothing has been recorded, it's made in a computer, it's purely like using an omnisphere synthesizer. What is the difference if I export that at 44.1 kilohertz and 16 bits versus 32 bits? What changes there if I choose to export it at a different bit rate, but nothing's been recorded?
It shouldn't change. It should just be the noise floor, the minus 96 dB. Well, no, maybe the noise floor. Well, it depends on how the synthesizer was coded. If it was coded to operate at 16 bits, no matter what your DAW software is doing. So the answer is I don't know, because you said if nothing is playing.
Right.
So I don't know, but of course. But it shouldn't be noise. You shouldn't hear noise. It shouldn't be audible, even if you turn up the volume to a healthy level. You shouldn't hear hiss.
Right, but so it doesn't matter if nothing's playing, but let's just say that I've written a piece of music, so there is actually sound, and it's purely using a synthesizer, so it would make no difference to the resulting signal whether I export at 32 or 16. And furthermore, what if I recorded at 8 or 4 or 2 or even 1 bit then? What would that do?
Well, that would make a lot of noise and would get really gritty sounding. Also, if you don't have dither, there's a demo of exactly that in my AES Audio Myths video. I got a bit reduction plugin and had I think it was a cello section playing a jazz piece. There's, I think, 12 or 16 cellos from the Berlin Philharmonic, one of those. And I went down, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4 bits. And once it gets down to 8, you start hearing, so it's gritty. It's really the noise, but it's also distortion because of the jump from bit to bit. The wave shape has changed. But dither would get rid of that. If you dither, then it's just noise.
So okay, wait a second. So I know that obviously in a digital waveform, like in the real world, the sine wave will just be a beautiful curve, but in the digital format, as far as I understand it, so what is exactly happening there where the bitrate is concerned? Does the bitrate affect how many steps that beautiful curve is turned into along the way? Maybe you can help me understand that. I can't quite wrap my head around it.
Right. Well, there's another video that you should see by this fellow named Monty Montgomery. It's 22 minutes long, and it explains all of that because there are no steps. Often waveforms are drawn as steps, but there's a thing in every digital to analog converter. There's a stage called the reconstruction filter, and that it's a low pass filter, and that gets rid of the steps because the steps are at the sample rate, which is twice the frequency, the highest frequency you can record. That's why 44 kilohertz is needed to be able to record up to 22 kilohertz of audio. So there's a very steep filter that cuts everything above, and those steps, and just generally with audio, when things move quickly, if a square wave coming out of a speaker, goes like that, and the sine wave is smooth. So when something moves quickly, that means there are harmonics and high frequencies involved. So those steps that you could say are there in the digital audio inside the computer, the number, between, the various numbers that represent the audio, the volume, but those steps are filtered out and they get smoothed away. And that kind of stuff is shown in my audio expert book, where I show how a low pass filter is made, just from one resistor and one capacitor, and how it smooths because it takes time for the capacitor to charge up, so it can't suddenly jump. Instead, it goes in a curve, and that's how those filters get rid of that.
So on that note, surely then if I was recording at something like instead of 48, let's say I was doing 96 or above kilohertz, surely there would be intermodulation distortion introduced that would then occur in the original mix and compound the original mix. Surely I would actually be damaging my mix by recording in higher frequencies because it would introduce distortion, like harmonic distortion, intermodulation distortion that wasn't there before.
Well, not necessarily. You only get distortion when things distort. So if you have something that's absolutely clean, whether it's a recording of a tom or a snare drum or a synthesizer generated sound, if it's absolutely clean, and well, of course, it's going to have its own harmonics, but it's only when you actually distort the medium.
Yeah, that's what I'm speaking about. Sorry, to be clear, I'm talking about if I add a harmonic distortion plugin to, say, like the master channel, for argument's sake, on something like a dubstep mixdown, and my synthesizers are working at 96 and I've recorded at 96, surely everything above what I can hear is essentially going to just compound and create IMD in the audio.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. But I just want to clarify just the terminology. It's bit depth and sample rate. There is, because the depth is kind of, it's a vertical thing. The sample rate is kind of horizontal, but there is something called bit rate, but that applies to MP3 files, lossy compression, AAC, and MP3 files, and lossy audio that goes along with videos.
Right, that's good. Sorry, I misspoke there. So that's good that you corrected me on that. Okay, back to, where does your fascination come from to take things apart and for understanding how things work? Where did that arise?
Well, I've always wanted to know how things work. Before I got into electronics, I built a go-kart out of a used lawnmower engine and a piece of plywood and some wheels, and I was like 12 years old. So I didn't have any money, but my father would buy me wheels and a piece of metal to make an axle, and it was really homemade, and pulleys and fan belt and stuff. But I was always so I was So in order to build, I would have loved a go-kart, a real one, for $1,000, but we didn't have that kind of money, and we weren't going to spend that much on a go-kart for a 12-year-old. So in order to make something like that, you have to at least know how it works. You have to know that, well, I need an engine. The engine goes really quick. A lawnmower engine spins 1,000 RPM or whatever, but you can't make the wheels go that much. So there's a big pulley and a small pulley. The small pulley goes on the engine, and the big pulley goes on the on the wheel, and it's like a transmission. It's the same thing, and it's exactly the same as a transformer in audio. Go from high impedance to low impedance. One is exchanging speed versus torque. You can drive slowly up a steep hill, or you can go really fast on level terrain, and it's the same thing with amperes or current versus volts in the transformer. So, and that's a big part of my audio expert book. I don't mean to keep plugging that, but that's the way I think is to see similarities between electronic devices and mechanical things, and pulleys and levers. A lever is the same thing. If you have a fulcrum and it's long on one side and short on the other, this goes up and down a lot, but you can lift it easily. And the other side goes, only a little bit, but it can have it lift a 400-pound weight, or a block and tackle, or you pick up an automobile engine that weighs 600 pounds or whatever they weigh, and you drop it into a thing. One person can do that. So it was really of necessity, I guess. But I've always been interested. I remember one of the things, this is so silly, that I've always been fascinated with from old cartoons, and you hear them all the time, are boing sounds. Boing. And you hear them in cartoons. I said, how do they make that? And I've learned that often it's that, what do they call that? A jaw harp.
Jews harp,
yeah. Jews harp or a jaw harp. I was trying to be politically correct. I'm Jewish, so I don't care. But, I'm a Jewish atheist. I don't believe, but I have the heritage. Anyways, and you go moing, yoing. So it's a springy metal, but you can also synthesize it. And I've actually did this a couple of years ago. I have a folder with a couple I've synthesized using a Moog type synthesizer. I use something called the Dream Station that I originally bought, and then Cakewalk Sonar bought it, the rights, and started bundling it with Sonar. So I have that, and it's basically a mini Moog, but in software. It's just pure software I have a video how to program analog synthesizers on my YouTube channel, about 15 minutes long. But it goes through everything about programming analog synths, but I do it with the digital Dream Station because it's the same thing. It sounds the same. It does all the same features. So, so it was. So I was always interested. How did they get that sound? And I think that's common. I'm not the only person that hears a mix. I see this all the time in groups. Well, usually it's what microphone are they using, which is just a stupid question. I'm sorry, guys, but that's a stupid question. It doesn't matter what mic. It's what are you putting in front of the mic, or maybe what processing. I mean, if it's how do they get that telephone effect that they use on lead vocals sometimes, or a background vocal? Well, that's done with a EQ. You cut all the highs and lows, and you just have the bandpass, or you can boost the middle, with a high Q or medium Q. That's how you get that effect. So, but people want to know that stuff. How do they do that? Because I want to do that in my songs. So I've always been interested in things. I used to build fuzz tones. In fact, I have one here. I don't know if this can.
Oh wow, you built that?
Yeah, it's all surface mount parts. This can be built into a guitar, under the volume control plate. And I used to do that when I was in my 20s. I built probably 15 or 20 or 30 of them for local guitar players and friends. I think I charged $25, and I built them on a little plastic, a coffee can lid, and poked holes and put the resistors and soldered it on the other side. And so I've always been interested in these things. How do I do this? And how does that work? How do synthesizers work? What makes a synthesizer go meow meow? Well, it's a sweeping filter with a high Q.
So is that how sound came into the picture? Like that exact example, like why sound? I mean, you ultimately could have engineered anything. What fascinated you in particular about the world of sound?
Well, I can tell you that too. Well, when I was in fourth grade, I started playing the violin and did that for 5 years and got pretty good. I played in the first violin section, but it wasn't really a big passion. And but when I was 16, I had a friend who had an acoustic guitar. I said, "Oh man, I always wanted to learn." And he showed me a couple of chords, and I was really hooked. And I bought a Fender, I think a Mustang, a kind of bottom of the line electric guitar, and really worked at it. And I played hours and hours every day. And after a year or two, I got pretty good. Back then, guitar players learned the songs by the Ventures. They were a popular instrumental group in the '60s with two guitars, bass, and drums. And so I would learn those songs. And some days, you play pretty good, and other days not so good. And I always said, boy, if I had a tape recorder, because I'd have a friend come over and say, "Oh, look at this," and "Oh, well, I did it yesterday, but today I can't quite get it." So I always wanted a tape recorder to be able to capture that, if I'm doing something good, and also the idea of play rhythm guitar and then overdub a lead on top of that, and so I actually bought a tape recorder with sound capability where you could record to the left channel, then bounce it to the right, mixing in another thing. And then you could copy that back to the left again. And then, after about 2 or 3 generations, it sounded awful and, really noisy and distorted. But, and then I actually bought a second tape recorder and bought a 4-track head, which I remember this was in the late 60s, 68, 69, something like that. It was $100 for a 4-track head, 1/4-inch tape head. But I bought a second stereo Sony tape recorder and ran wires from its electronics. So I actually built a 4-track tape recorder, but I used it mostly to overdub rather than record 4 things at once live. But I could do that. So that's why audio is, because I wanted to be able to record myself and record friends as I got more and more into music, more of that rather than people are into cars and doing tune-ups and taking the carburetors apart and and stuff like that.
Would you say that you ever would have pictured kind of like, your career as it has shaped itself now and like where you are now back then? And what would you say has been the highlight of that whole journey for you?
Well, I've done a lot of things besides just, electronics and music. I eventually got to play the guitar at a professional level, and there's some stuff on my YouTube channel, some old and some mostly actually new stuff. And I've written 4 or 5 pieces for full orchestra, arranged them. Unlike Paul McCartney, who wrote a symphony, but somebody else actually wrote all the parts. I do all my own stuff, for better or for worse. I'm not claiming it's great, but at least I've done that. I owned a software company. I got to be a real expert with DOS software before Windows, and had a software company with 11 employees, and that was very successful. And we were actually partners with Microsoft. Not we would put on shows together with others in the business. We sold add-on products, but this was really sophisticated programming in assembly language, and I really liked that. And also enjoyed writing. I was writing for recording magazines and then computer magazines, and then I started playing the cello in my 40s, and started writing for the Strad and Strings magazine articles about all kinds of stuff, not playing techniques because I was still a beginner, but about software that was meant for classical players, a music -1 accompaniment CDs. It's a complete violin concerto with a real orchestra, but minus the solo. And so if you're at that level, you can get to practice with a real orchestra. I performed a cello concerto with our local symphony a few years ago, but I did it on the electric guitar. It was actually a theme in variations called Rococo Variations. So I bought a Digitech effects pedal so I could have different sounds, fuzz and wah, auto wah, and all these sounds, and played it with the symphony. It came out really well. It's also on my YouTube channel. At least I think it came out well. There are some comments from people saying, "Oh, this should never have been done," and I read those comments. I've deleted a couple that were just outright insults. I mean, if they say you're an idiot, but mostly I leave those. I knew when I put that video up that there would be people that would not appreciate on a cello piece with orchestra. But I liked it, and the conductor really liked it. I mean, he really enjoyed it. When I approached him with the idea, he said, "Well, what's it going to sound like?" So I had this music -1 of a full orchestra playing, and I played electric guitar on 3 of the variations, and he thought it was really cool. That was a fun project. So there are a lot of highlights. I had dinner with Bill Gates once.
Really? Tell me about that.
Well, I used to. Well, it was a few of us. It was probably 10 of us, but I sat right across from him at a fancy Japanese restaurant. I was writing for Microsoft's System Journal, I think was the name of it. It was a programmer's magazine, because I was at that point a real expert programmer and writing expert level articles, to teach others. That's sharing what I know has always been a big part of what I do. So they had one night, this was in New York, I'm in Connecticut. Bill Gates was coming to town, so they arranged all the contributing editors and writers for the magazine to get together. So I got there early, and Bill was there, and I sat right across from him. but that was a high point. When the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, the guy, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." Dave was played by the actor Keir Delay. He actually came to my house where I had my software company one day, so I met him. That was a minor highlight. But I've had a bunch of businesses, and all reasonably successful. Real Traps was my last one, which I'm still involved with. Selling acoustic treatment and offering advice. That's a big part of what I do is advice and help. And if people can't afford to buy $4,000 worth of stuff, we have an affordable consulting plan. Well, here, I'll tell you what to do on your own.
Awesome, thanks for that. We're at the point now where obviously with the development of artificial intelligence, it's now creeping into our world in sound and music. Like, I saw an application the other day where certain artists have essentially sold their voices as algorithms, and so now I can go and sing something, put it into an AI plugin, and then it will be sung by someone like Ariana Grande. It will literally transform my voice into Ariana Grande's voice. That's quite interesting, certainly a bit shocking. I can imagine a world where, you think about ChatGPT and Midjourney, through a text prompt, I can now generate text based on a database, or I can generate an image based on a database. I imagine we're going to reach a point where I can say, I don't know, replace the string section with a woodwind section in X or Y piece. How does that make you feel as somebody who has trained as a musician? We're going to get to the point ultimately where no human player can replicate with the kind of precision what a computer is going to be able to do with a few words. How does that make you feel?
Well, I've thought about it. I don't have a lot of strong opinions. I do have some thoughts. First of all, in order to replace the strings with woodwinds, would be pretty tough, and I know they're getting pretty close to that with is it Melodyne or
Mhm.
there's some companies are doing things where they're actually taking extracting parts, making what do they call it, where you have different sections. But anyways, I know they're doing that. I don't know how perfectly that could ever be, partly because of the noise floor. There's noise. If you have three instruments playing the same thing, you can, and uh, a clarinet changes its tone. It can go from reedy to muted over the course of one note. So I don't know how software would know, well, this is the clarinets to remove, because it's not a static fingerprint of what it sounds like. But maybe they'll get that, by timing when the note starts, and see where the harmonics follow, and
Mm.
anything that's in that time frame or follows that time frame, even if the harmonics go up and down and change in level, maybe it can track that. I don't know how that kind of software works. That's really advanced
Mm.
stuff. My feelings are that ultimately technology is a good thing. I think the bigger problems are going to be copyrights. There's a pretty good op-ed in the Current Mix magazine by Greg Anderton, who's a well-known writer. He's about my age, and he's been around also doing electronics and playing the guitar and writing for years. And he had a really good take on AI. And he was saying, well, even if the algorithms are going to write your music for you, somebody still has to come up with the parameters to plug into the program to tell it
Mhm.
what to create. So, so I guess that's where the copyrights would be and where the skill would be. But I am a little scared by this. I think that music should be written by people, but but who am I to say that? If an algorithm can eventually write a better pop tune than me, I guess I would enjoy it.
It's interesting what you said about, like there's always going to have to be somebody to input that information, but that kind of does really narrow the pool in a way. Like before anyone kind of had a shot, if you sat down and like analyzed the great scores and really understood how music worked, sure, like you had a real shot of making it to the big time. But like I saw an article the other day that like there's a certain AI application, I don't know the name of it, but it can now predict a pop's chance of becoming a smash hit with like 97% accuracy, just based on like neurobiological information that it had been input with, and also just like a track record of the smash hits from like the beginning of time until now. That is terrifying. I mean, that ultimately means that you can just have it recreate whatever is going to appeal to people, and
Well,
that comes with certain implications. Yeah.
well, I'm skeptical of that, because to be a hit not only has to have a certain sound and be appealing to people and have a good beat and be in tune and stuff and performed well, but it also has to be promoted. So just creating a thing and posting it on your piddling YouTube channel where you have 6 followers, it's not 97% likely to be a hit. If you can get a major star to do it and put it on there with 6 million followers, well, yeah, it'll probably be a hit. And even if it was a crappy song, it'd probably be a hit.
That's
So
a good point.
I don't have an answer for that. But also there's a similarity between AI and a human, and that similarity is they both draw from a database of existing stuff. When I wrote, I have a video called Television. That's like an opus. It's 12-minute long with all my Telecaster guitar and me playing like a bunch of stuff, including violins and banjos and stuff. And when I wrote that, I embedded 12 things that I stole. There's a piece from an Eagles song. Trying to think of the name of the song. That doesn't matter. There's the main theme was stolen from Randy Newman's score for the movie. My old age kicking in here. Pleasantville. It's beautiful. It goes between a 1 chord and a minor 3, and that score is really great. There's a bunch of themes, but the main one is so I go from E to G sharp minor. But I said I'm going to make a piece based around those 2 chords. Of course, it does, has a funk section. It's much more than just those 2 chords. Um, but so a human has to study the literature. There's a thing I call the Dvorak uh, third, the Dvorak sixth. I forget. It's a Dvorak invented it, as far as I know, in oh man, I'm having trouble calling up these piece names. It's from a piano trio piece. The Dumke trio, and the Four Seasons in the '60s used it. I have a little 2-minute video on my YouTube channel where I show all these things that used it. Have you seen the Four Chords video by those guys?
Yes, I'm
You know,
sure.
and they go through like 100 songs that use the same damn chord progression. So this is sort of the same thing with about 6 or 7 things that use this thing that Dvorak did. So you learn these things. There's a famous quote that I think was attributed to Stravinsky, but I read somebody else said, no, that's not true. But anyways, it's good composers borrow, great composers steal.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's the truth. So whether it's a human stealing things that he or she thinks works well together, and oh, this is a nice little thing, and that Dvorak hook is just down da da down. It's just like a couple of notes with 2 chords. But I was determined to put that in. Actually, when I wrote my own cello concerto, I was determined to put that in there. And I did indeed. That's like, I think, comes up in 2 different places, or whether it's an algorithm that is deciding what to draw on. If they get the algorithms good enough, then I guess they can make good pieces. But fundamentally, it's the same process. You're drawing from what's been done. Now, if an AI algorithm can create new stuff, not drawing from a database, you start from scratch. That would be impressive, and maybe they're doing that already. I just don't know enough about the current state of AI.
That's an interesting observation and thought. I mean, would a human be able to do something without a database? Ultimately, like, it's only from the database that we're able to even do anything that comes from like the DNA storage of that database of experiences, right? So that's an interesting thought. Like, furthermore, you talk about like, okay, well, if we put a smash hit onto a YouTube account with no followers, it's not going to be a smash hit. That is something I haven't thought of, but like, it prompts the thought, well, what if I can literally write that smash hit based on AI data, and then I can literally just sing that song and use an AI algorithm to translate it into the voice of a pop singer and say, you know, release it under their name. I mean, that creates a whole lot of moral and ethical, like, you know,
right. Well, that would be illegal. It should be, you know, or be unfair or whatever. Yeah. and you know, I can sing in tune, but my voice quality isn't very good. You can, for people like me, a trick I actually learned from my Real Traps partner, Doug. He sings better than I do. He has a voice that sounds okay as it is. But he played me something he sang once, and it sounded really good. I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I played the thing just a half step low, sang it, and then brought it back up to pitch. And just that half step shift made a difference. And I actually did that in my television video, more to get different sounds. You know, I was doing a chorus of voices, and I didn't want it to sound like 12 Ethans or 6 Ethans. I wanted each one to have a different pitch, you know, different timbre or performance. But one of these days I'm going to try singing something and try that technique. So my point is, you don't have to turn me into you know, some well-known singer. I'd be happy just to have something that just sounds better than me. You know, it could be somebody, you know, a voice that's never been heard before, you know, just fabricated or whatever.
Yeah, I think what's always interested me is like pushing the boundaries of what a plugin can do, what a synthesizer can do, what an algorithm can do. It kind of makes me sad that I stopped writing music. If I was using, for argument's sake, one of these, you know, voice translating AI algorithms, and I wanted to turn my voice into a female voice, you know, instead of recording it myself, I'd probably go on to one of those like text-to-speech algorithms online and just type in a whole lot of gibberish and then like auto-tune it in the most ridiculous ways, you know, time stretch some elements of it, and then put that into the AI voice translating algorithm and see what that came up with. You know, that would probably sound quite bizarre. So, you know, that excites me. I think it excites me a lot that we're entering a world where kind of like, you know, just with a few words, you can explore what is in your mind and what your heart desires. You know, in a way that is really useful. I don't know about you, but it's always frustrated me just how long it takes to get the idea from your head into the computer. That's actually becoming easier now, which is now allowing, it's irritating some people, sure. They're getting frustrated. Well, oh, like I've dedicated my life to this, so why should some random get to create something so beautiful like that is actually just drawing upon and stealing my work? I totally understand that. But at the same time, for those of us who really know what we're doing, it should actually be like a godsend. Like I like the idea that I could probably write a piece of music like 20 times faster now with this than I would be able to without it. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my first thought is, why did you say you stopped writing music? Why don't you start again?
Well, I'm the one interviewing you. No, look, I mean, I obviously still play music and I have a company that operates in the music industry, but the main reason I stopped writing music was because ultimately I was writing music that was very niche and I couldn't earn a living doing that. And that frustrated me a lot. I'm writing something that is, of great value, but it's not being appreciated for that because the entire music industry has a certain like style and genre that is appreciated, what you might call the generic.
Right.
I don't have any interest in creating that kind of music. I'll play it as a DJ, but then that to me is more about the like emotions that I can curate in an audience, creating a good environment and a good vibe for somebody at their own wedding, because that's an important occasion for them. That's where I will kind of like, sink as low as to play every smash hit from the 80s till now. But I certainly have no interest in writing that kind of music. I never have. And if I find that even if I write something that has true musical value, and I have, I've written things that have true value. I've sent you that Stories Without Images concept album. That was the last thing I ever wrote. And it got a few thousand plays, and I thought, wow, that's great. But like I've got like mouths to feed. You know what I mean? So that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Okay, well, and that makes sense. I never even tried to write music for hire. Well, I actually ended up doing that a couple of times, some jingles and stuff, when my jingle partner was on vacation, and the Connecticut Lottery needed a jingle right away. So I did one. That was fun. But I write music for fun. I told you I've written a bunch. I've done a lot of pop tunes and mostly instrumental stuff. I don't really do vocals, but I did write one that a partner friend then wrote words to, and we produced as a vocal pop tune. But I do it for fun. I never really aim to make money. So that's a different thing. I was trying to make a living. I was always making a living with computers, with audio recording studios. I've had a bunch of different studios.
Okay, Ethan, it's been great chatting with you. We must definitely do this again. If you
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
if you have a thought that you can leave people with, let's say they're a musician or a producer, composer, an audiophile, as they call it, what thought would you leave them with moving into this kind of like new era when it comes to new technology?
Oh, I don't know. That's a pretty open-ended question. I mean, my main points I always try to get across is high quality audio equipment doesn't have to cost a lot, and it's also very rewarding to know how things work. Photography buffs know, good ones. Most of them, the ones that are really into it, they know all the settings in their camera. They know all about what it means. They know what f-stops are. They know aperture. They know all those things. Car enthusiasts, most of them, they take stuff apart. They can, change their own oil. A lot of times they can actually do a full tune-up. And they'll even have the computer that plugs in, to do all the stuff that modern cars can do. But audiophiles and a lot of recording people, sadly, they don't really care how the stuff works inside. And I'm always encouraging people to learn how the technology works. It makes it more satisfying for a more satisfying experience when you really understand. Sometimes when people give me a hard time, I say, look, I'm an expert. I've done all this stuff. I've designed electronic circuits. I've this, and this. What have you done beyond pressing play?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how to set up speakers properly in a room? Do you know whether they should be faced straight ahead or towed in and aimed at you? Do you know, how to calculate the right speaker wire gauge, from your power amp to your, it's fun. It makes it more fun to know these things. It makes it more fun for me, and I understand and appreciate, the left brain versus right brain people. Some people say, I don't want to know that stuff. I don't care. I had my installer come over. The guy from the hi-fi store came over and set it all up for me, and I don't care. I just want to record my voice. and that's fine. That's okay. But a lot of people, I think, would benefit and enjoy knowing more about this stuff. So I guess that's my answer to your question.
100%. I can totally relate. I taught a good friend of mine kind of like the basics of piano technique and playing and music theory yesterday. And like he had never opened the lid of his piano and looked inside. I mean, he's obviously a complete beginner, but like he had never even opened the lid and like looked at what happens when I press a key down. What happens to the hammers? What are all of these things inside this beautiful wooden case? And so I really, really resonate with what you just said. There's so much joy to be found in that wisdom and knowledge that's gained from the exploration process. So
Yeah.
thanks for that.
Well, yeah, well, one of the things I did, and I know we're just about done here, for my audio expert book, there's a lot of videos and audio examples. And one of them is a piano technician, a really serious guy, takes apart $100,000 Steinway piano and shows how it works. He actually takes all the stuff completely apart, the whole mechanism, the hammers, and explains how it works. That's one of the videos that's part of my book. When you get it, you get a link to where it is on the book's website. And I learned a lot from that. I mean, I know how pianos work, but this was really quite an interesting video. And there's a bunch of videos like that. There's a violin player talking about violin playing technique. A friend who's a conductor talks about how he conducts orchestras and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff beyond just how to use a compressor.
How do people find you? What is the best way to connect with you right now?
Well, I have a Facebook account where I post things. Not all the time. I don't want to. I know people that post like 25 things a day, or some that post once a day. I post a couple of times a month, once a week. Depends. So that's one place, and just search Ethan Weiner. There's a few of us, but I'm Ethan.Weiner.1. I'm the first one. And if you see what I look like here, you'll see a picture of me. Actually, it's me and my new girlfriend is the profile picture. And also my website, ethanweiner.com. If you Google Ethan space Weiner, spelled W-I-N-E-R, 5 letters, it comes right up with a bunch of links to my website.
Yeah, and people have to be careful because there are fake accounts of you on Facebook that have messaged me even, but thank goodness they did message me because that actually led to this interview. So I really want to thank you. And
that was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, a bonus question. Your girlfriend's in your picture now. You say, like, has she replaced your old cat in that sense? Like, where is your cat now? Is she still with us? I know that obviously that was quite a prominent feature in almost all media of you online. Whatever happened to the cat that was so prominent?
Well, right now I have 3 cats, and on my family page, it used to be a picture of me with a cat about 3 cats earlier who has since died. Noah, he was a great cat. He had AIDS, kitty AIDS, but it's basically the same thing. And he had a stroke, and they said he wouldn't get better. So, but just this morning, I updated the top picture, and there's still pictures of Noah farther down, and kind of in order of the cats I've owned recently. But I added a picture of me and my new girlfriend. So that's the top picture now on my family page.
There's that old saying, women are like cats, men are like dogs. Although I don't know if I can say that these days anymore, but certainly resonates with me.
Well, my new girlfriend is amazing. She's much, much younger than me, but she's really smart. She's a doctor of pharmacy. That's how I met her. She was a pharmacist at my supermarket, and I had a crush on her immediately. But she's a lot younger than me. But she's a real genius. I mean, she's a real genius. I told you she helps me with tech stuff, and I'm pretty tech savvy. And she's very funny. So there was something I was gonna. And she's a real badass. She has an 80-pound pit bull.
Wow.
But she's not. But this dog is a sweetheart. This is not what you think of when you think of a pit bull. This is a really sweet. It's pit bull mix, but it's mostly an 80-pound pit bull. But I love to say that, my girlfriend's a badass. But she's real smart. I'm immature. I'm a kid. I never had children, so I'm still a child at heart. And she's very, very mature for her age. So we get along great.
Well, I'm happy for you, Ethan. Thanks so much for the time. I hope that we can do this again really soon. I have to run. But
okay, me too. I got something to do.
Wishing you all the best. It's been great to catch up with you, really. And I hope we can hope that we can chat again very soon.
All right, good. All right. See you on Facebook.
Cool. Cheers, man. Bye. Mouse not working. There we go. I'm ending the meeting for everyone, so it'll auto close for you.
And could you see me? I was trying to. I didn't want to adjust the camera partway through, but I realized I was kind of low, and so I was trying to sit up.
Fine. It's always. Do you know what? No one actually cares. Most people
Right.
just listen to these things, right? They don't watch them.
And I'm seeing you and me and the little one. Are you going to go back and forth and do some editing, or just going to leave
No,
it
it's just going to be, I mean, it's not going to be like the very beginning. My editor will choose the point at which, you know, he feels we begin talking about something meaningful, and then he will cut just before this end part. He might put a sound bite at the beginning of the most interesting thing that we've said just to entice people, or he might not. But ultimately, I think these days we like to just jump straight into the conversation. You know, that's what people enjoy at the moment. They don't want to kind of like jump around too much. We don't have some crazy intro format like Diary of a CEO or anything. But the podcast is getting going now, which is really nice. You know, obviously when I interviewed you before, it was purely just like a passion project. Now it's like we're doing a podcast. So there's a good chance that this will get a good few views in years to come, which is nice. And I hope it's not the last time that we chat. I think that there's so much to unpack still, you know. So, but thanks for all the insights and wisdom.
All right. Yeah. So that's good. So you're not doing the editing. So that's fine. Yeah. All right. Well, good. All right. So I can turn all this off and we're done.
Yeah, 100%. I've recorded it. So as soon as I end the meeting, it's going to export.
All right. And you recorded my part at your end. I know some
exactly.
of them record my part.
You don't have to send anything because it's this very Zoom call is going to go online exactly as it is. And if we want to use it on other socials, we'll just verticalize it. So it will be edited into a 19:6 format.
And this will end up where, on YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube, and maybe some sound bites on TikTok and YouTube Shorts, etc. But mainly YouTube, and I'll send it to you as soon as it's up.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Okay. All right, great. Well, Liam, thanks, and I'll talk to you next time.
Cool, Ethan. All the best. Ciao, ciao.